Pikmin 4 is in development and very close to completion. When this quote was stated, I was a day away from turning 11. My experience with Pikmin was watching Let's Plays, being captivated by this strange series, and longing to play it for myself. I remember thinking that a fourth game would be neat, but the idea didn't excite me as much as it did when I was at the level I currently am with the series. Over the next 2 years, it would become clear that this quote wasn't exactly telling of the true nature of the game's development. It would have been more accurate to say a version of Pikmin 4 is in development and close to completion. Regardless, with the release of Hey Pikmin, a game that didn't appeal to me in the slightest, and the 2-year radio silence regarding the fourth game, the only new information being that this new 3DS game wasn't it, I lost faith that it would even exist. It became a mythical dream game that could never really exist. We did get major Pikmin releases in the years to follow, like a port of Pikmin 3 to Switch with added content and difficulty options, and Pikmin Bloom, which I have since pulled out every time I take a walk. But these weren't Pikmin 4, and my heart didn't dare to dream, for the crushing truth that it might never be real was too much to bear. And then, during the worst Nintendo Direct of the Switch era, we got something truly special. Pikmin 4, my dearest dear, finally you are here. It was tangible and real. It wasn't some ethereal dream game that only existed in the minds of rabid fans anymore. It was something to look forward to. It's safe to say that it was absolutely worth the 10-year wait between the last entry. Booting the game up to that piano piece while the camera pans around the scenery hit me in a way that so few games can. There's a part of me that still can't believe this game even exists. It's not perfect, and there are aspects of it that bug me, but the good stuff is so good that I don't care. It was a magical experience from beginning to end, and it's easily one of the best experiences I've had since the decade started. So let's get into why Pikmin 4 is so darn good. There were a few hints in the first game that the planet Olimar found himself on was actually Earth. There are tin cans and bottles, but the explicit references end there. These elements are so subtle that you might not give them more than a cursory glance. Pikmin 2 brings a lot more explicit attention to the fact that this is Earth, with the many ancient human artifacts that they attempt to perceive the purpose of. Pikmin 3 is about on par with the second game in terms of these references, with the many fruits you find as well as the flip phone generating a signal in the area. Pikmin 4 goes even further into this idea that PNF 404 is actually Earth in the future, as the areas are all associated with human structures, as opposed to the naturally occurring levels of the first 3 games. The Rescue Command Post is a garden, Sun-Speckled Terrace is a public park, Blossoming Arcadia is a playground, Serene Shores is a sandpit, Hero's Hideaway is the most explicit as the interior of a house, and Giant's Hearth is a campsite. Primordial Thicket is the only location that isn't explicitly tied to this abandoned human structure theme, as it takes place in a muddy forest. Seeing that your goal is to retrieve Louie, who just wants to be left alone in solitude, this works for the final area. Whether or not this theming is a good idea is up to the individual to decide. Personally, I think that it gives this game a unique flavor compared to the other entries. It helps that this is the best looking game in the series. The texture work is good, the water is amazing, and the creature designs are top notch, especially the Gildamandwee, which instantly became my new favorite enemy in the series. Just look at how adorable this guy is, his cute smile and those beady little eyes. If ever I were to have a pet from this series, it would undoubtedly be one of these guys. Another thing I really like about this game's presentation is the music. The tracks this time around don't focus as much on melody as they do creating an atmosphere. Sun-Speckled Terrace bounces short notes on a piano, giving off a quirky vibe that's perfect for setting up the adventure ahead. Blossoming Arcadia and Serene Shores are relaxing, tranquil pieces that pull off the same vibes as Distant Spring, with Serene Shores feeling weightless and dreamlike. I'm not sure if I like them quite as much, only time will tell, but listening to these tracks puts me in a mood that no other track from any other area does. Hero's Hideaway, the most strange and alien location in the game, features a very strange and interesting sound with clanging percussion, an accordion, and another piano playing another bouncy tune that contrasts nicely with the first area in the game. Giant's Hearth has a more western sound to it. Primordial Thicket is the most ominous, perfectly capturing this feeling of setting foot into an unknown forest, one that has existed for millennia, as the name would imply. The music in the caves is also wonderfully atmospheric. None of these tracks are particularly memorable, but despite that, I'd say it's easily my favorite soundtrack in the series. It helps that there are more memorable tracks in here too, like the Rescue Command Post, the title theme, and easily the best credits music to ever grace the series. The story also surprised me, being easily the best of any of the Pikmin sequels. It would take wizardry to get a better story than the first game, but 4 takes the cake for my second favorite. You play as the newest recruit of the Rescue Corps, tasked with helping rescue the original crew who was sent to rescue Captain Olimar after he sent out a distress signal. You soon discover that there are plenty of other civilian castaways, which is the most I've wanted to on 100% a Pikmin game, since if you don't, then everyone left on the planet will either die or become a Dandori monster. Speaking of, I really like the Leaflings. They're basically Pikmin 2 fans if you say you don't like the caves, refusing to let you near them if you have perceived Dandori issues, which is the exact response I would expect from this thing. It's a reference to the original game's bad ending where Olimar is taken into the onion and is then planted in the ground like a Pikmin. I like the mild, almost body horror of them, just being covered in leaves from head to toe, which allows them to breathe the oxygen in the air, but also the idea of having a bunch of leaves sprouting from their skin is horrifying to me. The Rescue Corps crew is a big step up from the 3 captains from Pikmin 3. They don't have quite as much depth as Olimar or Louie, though Shepard gets closer than anyone else, but with how many of them there are, I don't really mind. They each have distinct personality traits and are also named after dog breeds, which is very fun. I particularly like Dingo, and I was worried that everyone is going to find out he abandoned the pilot Bernard to save himself. And then when he offers a sincere apology, it turns out that Bernard didn't even know that he was abandoned. He's effectively a nicer version of Louie. End-of-day logs or emails have instead been replaced with conversation snippets between the different characters. And while the Pikmin 3 logs and the emails are charming in their own right, this is the only game after the first that I'm excited to finish the day and read what the developers have written. Another thing that this game does that I really enjoy is the rescue journal and the voyage logs that Captain Olimar wrote, which you unlock as you play the game. This was also something from Pikmin 3, but there's a lot more personality that shines through these writings. Captain Shepard isn't quite as engaging as Olimar, and I wish that there were a few more that she wrote, but I really like that they let a new character get a bit more depth. Louie's logs are all very fun to read, especially the ultimate testing range. It might just be the funniest thing in the game. Olimar, with his 80 logs, gets the most presence here. A lot of them are just for gameplay, but there are a few that are just fun little snippets, like when he tried to join the Pikmin in a song, which causes them to stop singing, or when he talks about how he likes seeing Moss's reaction whenever he opens his bag, how he almost accidentally ate a Pikmin, his brief writing about the happy memories Sunset brings him, all that good stuff. But my favorite of these is the shortest in the game, Olimar's 73rd log, with nothing but the words "I am so very tired," and an image of what are presumably his eyes half closed. It's simple, yet also haunting and even beautiful in a way that I haven't felt in the series since the original game. Seeing this for the first time was special for the same reason that most of Pikmin 1's logs are so special, and I'm glad that a new Pikmin game was able to fully capture that, even if for only one log. The other logs captured some of that magic too, but this one really got to me despite how brief it is. Granted, it is an unused log from the first game, but they had no reason to use it, so my point still stands. Now, if we were to judge Pikmin 4 based solely on how good it looks, how good it sounds, how good its story is, and how good the content is, then this would easily be the best entry in the series. But there are a few mechanical problems that I have with this game that prevent it from topping 3. And before we continue, I want to get it out of the way. My biggest problem with Pikmin 4 is how the Onion and Pikmin themselves work. On a conceptual level, I'm fine with it, but in execution, it's kind of annoying. The first change is that you can no longer have 100 Pikmin out at a time from the start. While I prefer being able to amass a giant army in the first 3 games, I'm actually okay with this as it really lets you feel the slow growth of your army, as opposed to the other games where you're limited with your Pikmin troops for only about a day or so. You rarely see the Onion sprouting new Pikmin, but that's the only major drawback I have with this system. The second change is that you can only have 3 types of Pikmin out at a time. And while I don't hate this change, it does baffle me. In 2 and 3, the drawback of having multiple types out is that you have less number of each type, meaning that you have a greater choice in how many obstacles you can tackle, but your numbers are spread a bit thin, so it might take a bit longer. This limitation in Pikmin 4 isn't used for too much, and it makes me wonder what the point of it is. Especially since it will recommend what Pikmin you need, so it's not like you can scout out the area and determine what you might need beforehand. I never really went with anything other than what was recommended. Neither of these majorly got in the way of my enjoyment, but the third change absolutely does. You can no longer propagate Pikmin unless you find their Flaric first. Technically, this is how Pikmin has always worked, but since you always find Pikmin right by their Onion anyway, it's not really the same. In Pikmin 4, you can find wild Pikmin, which is a wonderful idea, and it makes you value them more until you can get them more easily. but not being able to reproduce your population of any kind besides red until you find the specific cleric drains a lot of the fun out of gathering Pikmin. This would be an idea that I'd actually love if it weren't for the fact that you don't get some of these clerics until the end of the game.
Winged.
Pikmin aren't able to be replenished until you get to the Primordial Thicket, the last area of the game. Why they did this is beyond me, and it just diminishes the value of those types of Pikmin. Ice Pikmin are the only ones that I think are perfectly used with this system. You find a decent supply from the first 3 levels, but you can't overly rely on them because of how few you have. Then in Hero's Hideaway, you find their cleric and can properly reproduce them. This only works because they're more powerful than the regular Pikmin, so I'm fine with this. I feel like they should have made it so that you can get all of the major onions by the time you get through Hero's Hideaway, so that Giant's Hearth and Primordial Thicket could take advantage of your ability to fully reproduce all Pikmin types other than the whites and purples. I also feel like maybe they should have made at least 4 types of Pikmin recommended for these last few areas, so you'd have to think more about what Pikmin you'd want to take out, but that's neither here nor there. This is ultimately my only major problem with the game, and what holds it back from topping 3 as my favorite. It's hard to ignore since it permeates throughout the whole experience. Thankfully, everything else I have to say is mostly positive. I'm surprised I managed to get this far into the video without getting into the heart and soul of Pikmin 4, that being the concept of Dandori. This has been a part of the series from the beginning, but it's never been as heavily pushed or involved in every fiber of its being as much as it is with this entry. It's a Japanese word that effectively means planning or strategizing to get a task done as efficiently as possible. Apologies to all Dandori experts for my cringe definition explanation. It's the central idea used when engaged in a battle with someone or in these challenge caves. It starts out simple enough, but as you get to later Dandori challenge caves and engage in Dandori battles with Louie, they can get quite challenging. The major difference between the two is that the battles are fluid, with different elements that require you to constantly switch up your strategy, such as the random item that you can get that will either give you a boost or will inhibit your opponent. There are these bombs that will cause canisters of Dandorium to spill out of whoever's base it's brought to, and what changes your strategy the most, the different enemies and treasures that will become bonus items that give you more points. They're a ton of fun and offer a neat type of boss encounter, with you needing to outwit your opponent as opposed to just attacking them. The Dandori challenge caves are the best part of the main game, offering short time challenges similar to the side challenges in Pikmin 3. It's a lot stricter here though, and I love going through them. You have to make sure that there isn't even a second of downtime. Every Pikmin needs to be actively doing something, and keeping a consistent level of movement throughout is remarkably satisfying. This more direct focus on Dandori isn't the only thing that makes Pikmin 4 distinct from the other 3 games in the series. When the game was first announced, Miyamoto showed screenshots of the new perspective, and I'll admit that I was skeptical of it. Every time they showed the game, I was never fully on board with it. I just wasn't sure how well Pikmin would work with a closer, more traditional control scheme. Jumping into this one immediately after the first 3 highlighted just how weird it feels in comparison, and it took a while for it to really click with me. But once it did, I apologized profusely for ever doubting that it would work. It still feels like classic Pikmin, but the new perspective gives it a distinct feeling that makes it a bit more immersive. Since this game's area exploration is based on ancient abandoned human architecture, viewing everything from their perspective rather than from an above-head perspective works a lot better. In the first game, the overhead perspective mainly helps contribute to Olimar's isolation and loneliness, with you just being an observer, and it's a bit easier to keep track of the different captains in the sequels. And while this camera angle would probably have worked just fine for this entry, I'm glad that they decided to switch it up. The only problem that really arises from this is the lock-on. 90% of the time it's fine, but that 10% is quite frustrating and finicky. There are other smaller changes that have been made that give this game a different edge beyond just the camera shift. I'll start with what is easily the best quality of life feature introduced to the series. Whenever you've reached the minimum amount of Pikmin that can carry an object, it will pause your throwing, allowing you to spam the button and get a perfect amount of Pikmin on a task. This small thing makes a world of difference in how satisfying the game is to play, especially in the Dandori challenges. Another addition that makes the game feel more fun to play is the ability to move your base. Now you can't just move it wherever you please all willy-nilly, as that would break a lot of the challenge, but even just being able to move it to different set locations makes a world of difference in how you approach transporting treasures to your base, since you can go to the nearest landing spot and move it there to cut the distance down. While collecting ship parts, treasures, fruits, and enemies was satisfying in the first 3 games, I love how much snappier it feels here, especially in the early game where you have fewer Pikmin out. You also generally have to beat an overworld boss to claim the territory for yourself, so it's not like it just hands it to you. You have to work to unlock these different points on the map. The placement of these possible base locations makes the distance between the starting point of whatever you're trying to transport and the ending point of the beagle feel generally the same no matter where on the map you are. Pikmin will always try to find the optimal path to the base even after it's moved, so you don't have to worry about screwing them up by moving it, which ultimately makes exploring the service area feel better than it ever was in any of the previous games. One thing I didn't bring up when talking about Pikmin 3 were the bridges, mainly because I don't have much to say about them. They were changed so that you have to find the different parts in different piles on the map in order to proceed. I bring it up here because Pikmin 4 goes even further with this idea, by turning them from bridge parts to raw materials used for building bridges and climbable walls and caves in the overworld, and also as a currency for buying items. I love this system, and how it makes you prioritize either overworld exploration or gadget acquisition. The more gadgets you buy, the less material you'll be able to use for overworld exploration, and the more overworld bridges and walls that you build, the less you'll have to buy these gadgets, which is a great way of keeping it balanced. Some of these gadgets are consumables like Scrummy Bones, Pick Carrots, and Bombs, or are permanent upgrades like hazard-resistant armor for you and Ochi, Swift Boots increasing Ochi's running speed, and things like that. There are even things that can augment Pikmin behavior like the Charge Horn. Locking it behind a purchasable item is a little weird to me, as well as locking the Go Here function behind a skill tree, but otherwise it's a great system. But easily the best addition to Pikmin 4 is Ochi. First off, he's adorable, I mean just look at him. I love how friggin' weird the dogs look, with their lack of nose and 2 feet. They fit right in with the many creatures featured across the series. But the gameplay utility that he offers is downright magical. Pikmin can ride on top of him, making it far easier to transport them. Plus, it finally solves the biggest annoyance plaguing the series from the beginning, transporting Pikmin up slopes and through tighter pathways. Since they aren't spilling out around you as you traverse them, it's impossible for them to get stuck on a wall or fall off wherever you're trying to go. Also, I like the visual of them all clinging to him. He also acts as a hybrid between a secondary captain and a horrifically overpowered Pikmin. You can control him independently, which took me an embarrassingly long time to learn you could do. He doesn't have quite as much versatility as a regular captain, especially since some commodities that you get with the captain, such as plucking Pikmin, have to be learned. But it's not a big deal, especially in how he helps with your workflow. Once Ochi learns how to swim, you can use him to get non-blue Pikmin across bodies of water. Though why this isn't a part of the skill tree is beyond me. He just kinda gets the ability to do it after you almost accidentally drown him. He can rush to break pots as well as attack enemies and knock treasures on higher platforms down, as well as cross-moving conveyor belts regardless of the direction. He can dig treasures up, he can pick up on the scent of nearby treasures, castaways, onions, /Flarix, raw materials, and different types of wild Pikmin. He can also carry items back to the Beagle. You can even use the ultra spicy spray on him like the Pikmin, which powers him up in a similar way. There are a few areas that he can't reach, particularly areas only accessible via climbing walls. And in caves, there are areas that only he can reach with these tubes that the main captains can't get through, which helps gives the levels a bit more depth. He can also jump up ledges, which the player character can't do. I love how much maneuverability he adds to the game. It's a ton of fun going from one place to the next because of him. But the best thing about Ochi is the skill tree, where he can become the ultimate life form. If the idea of not leaving all of the castaways to die isn't a compelling enough reason for you to want to rescue everyone, then Ochi's pup drive is. Every time you rescue a castaway or cure a leafling, Ochi's pup drive will increase, and when his drive reaches a certain point, you can trade it in for him to learn a new skill. Buff gives him the ability to outshine even the purple Pikmin in his carrying capacity, going all the way up to 100 the further you go, meaning you'll never struggle to carry anything. After completing the main game, he can learn Swallow, which allows him to carry an object in his mouth, even castaways. It's a lot more useful since his movement speed is significantly faster than it is when he drags an item. Chomp increases his damage output, makes his rush ability more powerful, and takes less time to charge. He can learn to dig faster, he can learn to swim faster, and even attack underwater enemies. He can learn to pluck Pikmin even faster than the captain, he can learn to heal on his own, and gather idle Pikmin. It's quite a lot, and it adds a nice sense of progression as you play through the game. I was always pumped to rescue castaways to upgrade him, and it's nice to compare the small, generally ineffective thing to the full-grown rescue dog he was born to be. For as helpful as Ochi is, the Pikmin are still the main attraction. All types from the previous entries are here and accounted for, and while it would have been nice for some to get a bit more utilization, they all still have their moments to shine. Whites and purples return from the second game, and while purple Pikmin are still overpowered, I find that I'm a lot more lenient towards them here, for two main reasons. First, the game scarcely ever recommends them, and since I have the game just auto-select my Pikmin group most of the time for the sake of convenience, I don't rely on them in every situation as I do in Pikmin 2. Second, the difficulty balance of 4 is a lot better than the difficulty balance of 2. That game was either obnoxiously difficult or far too easy, and since 4 lowered the skill floor, they don't stick out as much. Also, Ochi is far more powerful than them, getting away with it only because he's a pseudo-captain. White Pikmin aren't really used that much outside of the Primordial Thicket. Rock Pikmin and Winged Pikmin from 3 don't get too much interesting use, which is a bummer given how neat they are. The Winged and Whites do get some usage in the Primordial Thicket, and Rocks get a bit to do in Giant's Hearth, but they pale in comparison to the other types. Not like I was too upset by this, because the 2 new types introduced in this game are some of my favorites in the series. Ice Pikmin are visually just light blue rock Pikmin, and they have a lot of the same limitations, such as the inability to stick to enemies. But they have one of the best powers of any Pikmin in the series, and are probably my second or third favorite Pikmin type. They have the ability to freeze water in enemies. For one thing, this along with Ochi makes water less of a hazard and more of a different type of terrain that you can approach from a few different angles. Blue Pikmin are still the only type that can explore under the water, but Pikmin can transport items across the top of a body of water as a quicker path, for example, making them invaluable when exploring. But their combat is where they get truly interesting. In Pikmin 2, they introduced the Ultra Bitter Spray, which had the ability to turn enemies and bosses into stone, rendering them completely useless. It's remarkably game-breaking, and some boss fights can be finished in a matter of seconds with it. The Ice Pikmin functions similarly, with the enemies having a reduced defense, and the corpse not dropping, but rather Nectar and Ultra Spicy Spray. But there's one nuance that makes them a fun addition to combat rather than a complete game breaker. Ice Pikmin fill up a ring around the enemy's health bar, and when it's full, the enemy freezes. They can be frozen instantly by eating one of them, but if you voluntarily let that happen, I think you're an unforgivable monster. You lose a valuable member of your party, and since you can't conveniently replenish your supply until the last third of the game, it makes them far more precious. One of the only times I like the Flaric system. Freezing enemies requires you to be a lot more thoughtful in how you approach them, instead of just pressing a button. Glow Pikmin are the other new type introduced, and they're exclusive to the night expeditions. Though if you have glow seeds, you can also use them in caves. They're designed like ghosts, and are similar to the Bulbmin in that they are immune to all hazards. They have a charge attack that can stun enemies, allowing them to swarm them and damage them. It can even stun a group of enemies. While this is a powerful attack, the game balances this by having them fight the Smoky Prog, so that's epic. The undead Pikmin sent from heaven to fight the undead demon slug thing from hell. Quick side note, the red and black substance surrounding the Smoky Prog is called gloom, just like the red and black substance from Tears of the Kingdom, meaning that it can be reasonably assumed that Demon King Ganondorf is the origin of the Smoky Prog, and you can't prove otherwise. Speaking of Glow Pikmin and this freak, now we get to talk about the night missions, the biggest gameplay addition exclusive to this game. I'm honestly surprised it took them 3 entries to add night exploration with Nocturnal Pikmin to the game. It seems like a logical step in the series' progression. Regardless, the night missions are some of my favorite parts of the game. It's not just day missions, but at night with a different type of Pikmin, because then there would be no point in separating them into 2 categories. Instead, you're tasked with protecting Illuminal, the Glow Pikmin nest, from the creatures of the night so that the glow sap produced during the morning can be used to cure the leaflings. Nightfall was always scary in the other games because that's when the Pikmin you don't have in your squad dies. You're never on the planet's surface during this time, always safe above in the upper atmosphere, so you never have any idea of what's going on underneath you. The atmosphere of the night missions is suitably horrifying. The music is really odd and unsettling, perfectly capturing the feeling of the creatures of the night, roaming straight for you. When Illuminal is under attack, you feel the pressure with the music almost sounding like a siren. Just like how you dread the coming of the night while exploring during the day, the dawn's arrival is what you look forward to the most. Everything from the day portion of the game is inverted here, and it acts as a nice refresher after completing everything during the day. As for the actual gameplay, I really like it. Glow Pikmin function a little differently from regular Pikmin, primarily in how you grow your squad, and this difference is what makes the night gameplay so engaging. These Mario Galaxy Starbit looking things are called glow pellets, and they're what replenish your supply. When you're out looking for these pellets to increase your numbers, you leave the Luminol exposed, and Ochi can only do so much on his own. And when there are 2 Luminols that you need to protect, one will be left completely exposed if you leave. And on the later nights, having a large squad of Glow Pikmin is going to be extremely useful for how many difficult enemies they throw at you. There's also a second reason you'll want to leave the Luminol. The night ends either by making it to sunrise without the Luminol being destroyed, or by killing all of the enemies, which opens up 2 different playstyles, those being defense or offense. Killing the enemies ends the night sooner, but also gives the Luminol a greater chance of being destroyed. Defending the Luminol makes the night last longer, and there will be larger waves of enemies in the later part, but it's also easier to keep track of its progress and protect it. To make it a bit easier on you, there are also Tricknolls that act as a drop-off point for glow pellets, and more importantly, act as a target for enemies, which you can use for all sorts of strategies depending on your current goal. And if you're a little baby who can't do the final mission because you have a Dandori issue, you can have Dingo complete it for you, which gives you the glow sap, but also mocks you by putting a Dingo icon instead of a completion icon there. And I definitely just did this for footage gathering purposes, and not because I suck at the game and spent 15 minutes on this one stupid night mission and just wanted to get a move on to get to the end of the game. Anyway, I think that the night expeditions are a great addition to the series, and I can't wait to see what they do to advance the idea in future entries. Pikmin 4 divides its attention between the surface and caves, so not as much thought could be placed into either section so as to prevent the caves from outshining the above ground level design, or the above ground outshining the cave level design. So what we're left with is a compromise of both being pretty good, but not the absolute peak. Pikmin 3's levels were layered with a ton of different pathways and moving parts, while here they aren't quite that intricate. But there is one thing that 4 has over 3 in terms of its level content, that being that there's just more. Formidable Oak is an amazing end to the game, but it isn't really a proper area. It's a gauntlet and a boss fight arena with no purpose other than that. Primordial Thicket, meanwhile, is an actual area with plenty to do. All 6 of these levels offer roughly the same amount of stuff to do, making for the most content-rich Pikmin game, even ignoring all of the caves. Sunspeckled Terrace and Blossoming Arcadia are solid opening areas, easing you into the gameplay loop and the many mechanics. Blossoming Arcadia also acts as a gorgeous evolution of Awakening Wood's main visual style, with many pink petals lining the ground and falling in the foreground. They're very standard Pikmin levels without a ton to really differentiate them from the usual fare from the series. The next 2 major areas, Serene Shores and Hero's Hideaway, both have unique gameplay elements that help them stick out from the other 4 areas, and they are easily my favorite levels in the game. The water in Serene Shores will recede in the afternoon, giving non-blue Pikmin greater maneuverability, as well as access to a few specific treasures. The sandcastle here also acts as a neat landmark. While it's a small thing, I think that environmental changes depending on the time of day offers a neat contrast that can change how you develop your plan for that day, and what you prioritize and when. Hero's Hideaway has the most foreign and strange terrain as you're exploring the interior of a house. It's enormous, with you needing to explore in order to find out how to get up to the higher ledges. But what's really interesting about this area is Moss. She doesn't act as an enemy or an antagonistic force, more so a nuisance. She'll patrol the area searching for stray Pikmin, which she'll round up and bring to the exterior of Olimar's base, since she wants to help him by gathering Pikmin for him. So you need to make sure that you neutralize her, or plan your route around her when carrying out your task, since she can easily disrupt them. Once you beat these 4 areas, the game pulls a Pikmin 2 and reveals after the credits finish that this was only the first half of the game, with the second half being to cure Ochi as he's become one of the Leaflings. It's a little abrupt, but more excuses to play Pikmin is always a good thing. These latter 2 areas don't have as interesting ideas as the previous 2, though I still enjoy them. I find myself often forgetting about Giant's Hearth when thinking about the game, which is strange because it's a ton of fun. The focus on these bonfires to get burning pine cones to access new pathways as you burn down bundles of hay is pretty fun, and I like that the central set piece is a giant outdoor grill. I was not feeling Primordial Thicket when I first started playing through it. I can't quite place my finger on why I didn't care for it exactly, but what I do know is that once I killed the Puffstool and started really exploring the area, I started to really get into it. After 5 levels centered on human locations, the pure wilderness angle feels really refreshing. I like how the core 3 Pikmin this area is centered around is a new type introduced in 2, 3, and 4, converging the best type introduced in each entry for primary area exploration. It's not the best level in the game, and there's not a lot that stands out about it, but it's still good regardless. I struggle to write this part of the script because while I like the 6 areas in this game, it's hard to pick out specific reasons why I like them. I also think that the lack of mechanical features as interesting as the levels in 3 is where the game could feel like it's running out of steam. Not to a major extent, but for the only time while playing a game in the series, I was getting a little burnt out from the game. It really strengthened my belief that Pikmin is at its best when it's shorter and focused on replayability for value. I do love how much stuff there is in this game, but it's not quite as bingeable or digestible as 1 and 3. My experience with the caves in Pikmin 2 colored my views on the caves in Pikmin 4, and I find it impossible to talk about them without talking about how they fixed every major problem I had with the Pikmin 2 caves. For one thing, despite there being far more caves in 4 than in 2, the gameplay is about a 40-60 split between the surface and the caves, as opposed to the 20-80 split that occurred in that game. They still uptake more of the total playtime, but it's not to an overwhelming degree. Even if it was though, I'd be fine with it because the caves are really fun to go through. The biggest problem that the caves in Pikmin 2 offered was that they were randomly generated with no human thought behind any of the design choices. Pikmin 4's caves all have set designs, and it makes it feel really good to play. A lot of the elements that were frustrating in Pikmin 2, like enemies falling from the ceiling, I'm way more okay with, because if a catastrophe happened, I'm able to reset and adjust my strategy accordingly. Rewinding time is a legitimate feature specifically introduced for less skilled players instead of a borderline exploit, and the game is specifically designed with this potential playstyle in mind, as opposed to the second game. These two elements make it more fair and engaging to go through, since there's never a time where I can blame the game for unfair setups, and I never have to worry about dull and repetitive gameplay while down here. They didn't even have to abandon the core visual and aesthetic choice from Pikmin 2 to make them superior either. Caves that I thought were eyesores in that game, like Subterranean Complex, look pretty good here, mainly due to the great texture work. They're still very angular and cramped in how they're set up, but since everything is here with a legitimate purpose, and there are no pathways that lead to nowhere, and at least one human being who knew what they were doing was behind these choices, it makes them a blast to go through. I enjoyed going through the caves when I first started playing, but the moment I fell in love with the caves was when I was going through Seafloor Resort, swimming around on Ochi trying to figure out how in the heck to get onto the upper floor of the sublevel. This moment is when they clicked for me, and when I got up with a method that the developers most likely didn't intend, I finally grew a real appreciation for their inclusion in the game, rather than being relieved that they weren't exactly the same as they were in Pikmin 2. I like how they tie into the overall gameplay loop too. The above ground section is about free roam exploration, being able to freely move about and grow your forces, while the caves are about navigating through the limited space, and carefully managing your resources to progress through. There are even a few navigational puzzles to solve, like these conveyor belts, or with the weird layout that you have to work out. These are nothing like Zelda dungeons or a good Metroidvania, but from what the series has put forward prior to this game, they're pretty complex by comparison. There's even the Engulfed Castle, a reference to the submerged castle from Pikmin 2, and it's just as horrifying and even more fun to get through than the original. In fact, all of the references to Pikmin 2 featured in this game were good. While I personally rank it in 4th place of the 4 games, seeing all of these still put a massive grin on my face, and I'm happy that Pikmin 2 fans finally got some proper recognition after 19 years of patience. I especially love how they handle the final boss. It's implied that Louis was controlling the Titan Dweevil, and in Pikmin 4 there is no doubt about the fact that Louis was controlling the ancient Sirehound and is trying to kill you. That was easily my favorite reference in the whole game. Before moving on to the bosses, I want to briefly talk about Cavern for a King, the last cave in the game. While it isn't as good as Formidable Oak as an ending to the game, I do think that it builds up to the final boss pretty well. I wish it did a bit more to test your Dandori abilities, as that was the main driving force behind the game, though a gauntlet of enemies you need to defeat works well enough. Some of these are really mean too, like the one with 3 Emperor Bulblaxes and another one with a Smoky Prog. Wish there was a bit more to it, but it still functions. I think my biggest disappointment with Pikmin 4 is the bosses. They aren't bad or anything, but with how incredible the bosses in 3 are, I can't help but feel that they're a bit lackluster here. There are some definite highlights, like Groovy Longlegs and his sick diegetic beat that plays during the fight. The returning bosses are all pretty fun. The Water Wraith is far less obnoxious to fight, Man at Legs is pretty fun with the outrunning its turrets offering a nice little thrill, Smoky Prog is a lot easier than his original outing in Pikmin 1, but since he's a mandatory boss this time around, I'm fine with it. He's manageable on the night expedition since you can use your glow Pikmin to stun it, but in the final cave you don't have that luxury, so you have to actually get good in order to beat it. I don't know, a lot of the bosses in Pikmin 4 just feel like bigger enemies, to the point that I'm not even sure if they are bosses or not. It blurs the line between the two, and while that isn't necessarily a bad thing, when you compare it to Pikmin 3, which has these colossal, monumentous fights, it's hard to not see it as a downgrade, especially since the bosses are one of my favorite parts of that game. There is one exception to this though, that being the Ancient Sirehound, the final boss of the game. Not only is it a really fun fight, it became my favorite final boss fight not just in the Pikmin series, but one of my favorite all-time favorite final bosses Nintendo has ever made. The only thing that the Plasm Wraith has over it is better utilization of the different Pikmin types, because with this one, all of the non-purples are here for moral support. It's a sweeping 5-phase battle, focusing on different elemental attacks that you need to dodge, while waiting for its tail to become grabbable by Pikmin to topple it over so you can launch an attack on its stomach. You're always on the move, and it's really engaging throughout. Each phase lasts for the perfect amount of time, and it has an epic rock theme to boot. Overall, while the main levels and bosses of the game may be lacking compared to the previous installment, the vastly improved caves and the incredible final boss more than make up for it. And would you believe that we still haven't even gotten to the best part of this game? Once you've successfully rescued Olimar, he'll regale you with a story of how he ended up becoming a leafling, thus taking you to a secret side mode. Olimar's shipwreck tale is probably my favorite piece of Pikmin content ever produced. It's effectively Pikmin 1, but with Pikmin 4's mechanics. You have 15 days to gather 30 ship parts, and couple that with it taking longer to access the resources you'd be able to have from the original game, and you have yourself a wonderful addition to this game. Outside of the lack of Olimar's personal and thoughtful logs, it perfectly captures how the first game feels. I love how it forces you to gather multiple ship parts a day compared to the first game's pace of one ship part per day, helping it slot in nicely with the Dandori theming present in the rest of the game. The pacing is really satisfying and snappy, seeing how it removes the caves, the need to rescue castaways, and the Dandori battles and challenges. This is Pikmin in its purest form, with nothing else added. That's not to say that this added stuff is inherently bad, just that it's extra stuff mixed in with Pikmin's strategic gathering. It also restricts you to using the core trio of Pikmin, meaning you can't take advantage of the benefits you receive from the other types. I don't have too much else to say about it, mainly because it uses the same mechanics and levels from the base game, just retooled a bit to fit with this different type of gameplay. When it comes to individual sections of the Pikmin games, this is the best by a mile. It's substantial, not just being a quick 10-minute side mode, but rather a fully formed experience. It's challenging with a tight deadline to meet, and you get to control Moss, who is superior to Ochi in nearly every way. That's about all I have to say about Pikmin 4, so let's wrap the video up now. Pikmin 4 isn't a cutting-edge, once-in-a-generation masterpiece that blows everyone away and reminds them of what true artistry in this medium can be. And that's never really what Pikmin has been. It's always been a series off in its own corner doing its own thing. And every time it comes out with something special, even if I am as personally receptive to some of the elements of its design. It's a step back from 3 in some ways for me, and I don't appreciate some of the ways that it changed up the core mechanics from the series. Despite that, it offered a Pikmin experience unlike anything the series had delivered before, and made the future of Pikmin brighter than ever before. It's a special game that I still can't believe I've beaten. I love the addition of Ochi and how he changes the gameplay. I love the explicit focus on Dandori, and how it gives the game a distinct edge compared to the other 3 games. While Pikmin 3 is still my overall favorite game in the series, there's no denying that Pikmin 4 offers the highest peaks it's seen thus far.